Imagine waking without an alarm, without glass in the windows, without the low electric hum of a house, without a clock glowing in the dark, without any sense that the morning belongs to a timetable somebody else has made for you. The air is cold enough to make you pull your knees a little closer to your chest. Beneath you, there is a layer of grass and plant fiber, softened by repeated use, and over that perhaps a hide that still carries, very faintly, the smell of smoke and animal fat. Somewhere nearby, embers are breathing in the ash. A child stirs. Someone coughs. Outside, before you can yet see the whole landscape, there is that first thin hint of light that tells you night is loosening its grip. For most of human history, that was how mornings began. Not with a rush, but with a return. Not with a schedule, but with light, temperature, hunger, and the presence of other people. And if we ask a very simple question, what did early humans actually do all day? The answer turns out to be much richer, calmer, stranger, and in some ways more familiar than the old cartoon version of prehistory ever allowed. The old picture is dramatic because drama is memorable. In that version, life before agriculture is one endless emergency. People are always starving, always sprinting, always one mistake away from death. Men are out heroically hunting every day. Women are silently gathering whatever they can. Nobody rests. Nobody laughs. Nobody makes anything unnecessary. Nobody has time for beauty. Nobody has time for stories. Nobody has time for music. It is all struggle from dawn to dark. But archaeology, paleoanthropology, ethnography, and studies of recent foraging peoples all complicate that image. Early human life could certainly be dangerous. Infant mortality was high. Injuries could become crippling. Infection was a constant threat. Food supply rose and fell with weather, season, migration, and luck. Yet those realities did not erase everything else. What the evidence shows, again and again, is not a species trapped in permanent panic, but a species astonishingly good at cooperation, adaptation, technical skill, close observation, planning, and shared meaning. So tonight, let us slow the whole question down. Let us not chase a mammoth in the first paragraph and call it a day. Let us stay with an ordinary day instead. Not a legendary hunt. Not a funeral of unusual splendor. Not the most spectacular cave painting expedition in the archaeological record. Just a plausible, evidence-based, ordinary day in the later Pleistocene. Perhaps around 40,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens already had language, symbolism, clothing technology, fire, complex tools, and social worlds deep enough to carry memory across generations. Of course, there was no single human day. A coastal forager near shellfish beds lived differently from a reindeer hunter on a cold plain. A family moving through woodland had different rhythms from people camped at a rock shelter. What happened in southern Africa could differ dramatically from what happened in Ice Age, Europe, or Western Asia. We need to hold that in mind from the start. There was no universal prehistoric lifestyle. There were many. Still, certain patterns repeat often enough that we can sketch a careful picture. And the first thing to understand is that the day did not begin with isolation. It began with the group. You did not sleep alone unless circumstance forced it. Human beings are cooperative apes, and by the Upper Paleolithic, they were already living in social networks dense with obligation, affection, memory, irritation, teaching, dependence, and mutual care. Camps may have been small by modern standards, perhaps 20, 30, or 40 people in many cases, though numbers could shift seasonally and larger aggregations certainly happened at some times of year. That number is not accidental. Too few people, and the group becomes fragile. Too many, and mobility becomes difficult. Conflict becomes harder to smooth over, and daily coordination gets more complicated. Small bands made sense. A small band changes everything about daily life. You know every face. You know who snores, who wakes lightly, who is patient with children, who gets irritable when hungry, who remembers where the water lies late in the dry season, who is good with flint, who is careful with fire, who tells the best stories, who can calm an argument before it cracks the camp in half. Those details are not trivial social color. They are part of survival. In a group that small, skill and temperament matter every day. So morning begins with that awareness of others. Someone is already awake, because in many camp settings, there is almost always some partial wakefulness around the fire. Not a formal night watch with drilled shifts and rigid duty rosters, but a looser pattern of tending embers, turning over in sleep, feeding a child, listening for sounds beyond camp, and stirring when the cold bites hardest. Fire mattered too much to neglect. In many times and places, it was warmth, cooked food, light, protection, social focus, and technical power all in one. A maintained hearth is not a luxury in the prehistoric world. It is a center dot, and the hearth changes the architecture of waking. Rather than everyone springing up at once, the day gathers itself. A few people sit near the coals first. Ash is moved. New fuel is added. Smoke lifts and thickens, then thins again as the fire catches. The air shifts. Heat spreads. More people rise from bedding. Children are almost certainly among the earliest to break stillness. Across foraging societies, children are not miniature adults forced into silent efficiency. They are energetic, curious, often physically free, folded into community life, learning constantly through watching, imitation, play, errands, and small risks. The bedding itself tells us something important. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Border Cave in South Africa shows that humans were making prepared bedding from grasses and plant material astonishingly early, long before 40,000 years ago. Those beds were sometimes layered over ash and combined with aromatic plants, perhaps helping with comfort or insects. So when we imagine prehistoric sleep, we should not imagine people simply collapsing at random onto bare stone every night. People prepared sleeping areas. They knew the ground steals heat. They knew insects are miserable. They knew comfort matters, not because comfort is modern, but because bodies always mattered. You wake stiff sometimes, yes. The world is not padded, but you wake into skill, not chaos. Perhaps the first real task of the day is assessment. Someone steps beyond the sleeping area and studies what happened during the night. Was there rain? How strong is the wind? Are there fresh tracks close to camp? Has a scavenger been near the refuse area? Are the clouds suggesting stable weather or change? For people living directly in an environment, rather than occasionally visiting it, observation is not a hobby. It is a constant, low-key reading of signs. The world is full of information. Most of us have simply lost the habit of noticing it. Tracks matter. Droppings matter. Bird calls matter. Smell matters. The feel of the air matters. The direction of smoke matters. A hunter or experienced gatherer may notice in seconds what a modern person would miss entirely. Not because prehistoric people were magical, but because attention is trainable. And theirs was trained from childhood in landscapes where survival rewarded good noticing. And then, before any grand plan of the day takes shape, there is usually food, though not breakfast in the modern, standardized sense. Early humans did not live by fixed meal times mapped onto clock hours. They ate according to opportunity, hunger, season, labor, and what was available from previous work. Maybe there is leftover roasted meat from a successful hunt. Maybe dried plant food. Maybe nuts collected and stored over a short period. Maybe roots that were set close to the hearth overnight to soften. Maybe marrow-rich bones waiting to be cracked. maybe shellfish in coastal settings, maybe nothing substantial until more food is gathered later. This is where one of the most persistent myths needs quiet correction. Early human diet was not just meat, and it was not just whatever random berries somebody happened to spot. Archaeological evidence from dental calculus, starch grain analysis, plant residues, faunal remains, grinding stones, and wear patterns on tools shows that people in many prehistoric contexts ate varied diets. Plants mattered enormously. Starchy underground storage organs mattered. Nuts mattered. Seeds mattered. Fruit mattered when available. Meat mattered. Fish mattered where it could be had. Insects sometimes mattered. Small game mattered. Big game mattered too, but not as an everyday guarantee. That matters because it changes the rhythm of the day. If your entire existence depends on heroic, high-risk hunting every morning, then life is one thing. If instead your group relies on a broad subsistence strategy, combining gathered plants, small animals, stored foods, opportunistic finds, and occasional large hunting success, then the day opens into a different shape, still busy, still serious, but not permanently pitched at cinematic intensity. Around the hearth, food is also social. One person does not sit in a separate corner guarding a private refrigerator. Food is shared, commented on, judged, remembered. Who brought it? Who processed it? Is there enough? Who needs more? Are children fed first? Does an injured person receive a soft portion? Does an elder get marrow or fat because chewing is harder now? These are not sentimental questions. They are the living mechanics of cooperation. And while that happens, the day begins to divide. Not along perfectly rigid lines, but along practical ones. Some people will go out to gather. Some may repair tools. Some may stay with very young children. Some may process hides. Some may scout game. Some may tend those who are ill or old or recovering from injury. Some may maintain the camp itself. In a mobile foraging society, camp maintenance is real work, even if no walls of brick stand around you. Wood must be collected. Waste must be managed. Bedding refreshed. Water obtained. Meat dried or smoked if possible. Plant food sorted, peeled, pounded, or roasted. Cordage made. Clothing repaired. Containers maintained. None of this looks glamorous in a museum case. All of it is civilization in miniature. Let us follow the gatherers first. Because dramatic storytelling has given hunting far more attention than it deserves as the sole image of prehistoric labor. Gathering is not just wandering around and picking things up. It is one of the most knowledge-heavy activities in the human story. To gather effectively, you need a mental calendar of landscapes. You need to know where particular species grow, when they are worth harvesting, which parts are edible, which parts require processing, which lookalikes are dangerous, how recent weather has altered availability, and how much to take without destroying a patch that may matter again. That is a form of expertise as real as engineering. Imagine moving out from camp in a small group. Perhaps one experienced adult, one or two younger adults, some older children, and a small child carried or walking in bursts. The pace is steady. There is talk, but it is not non-stop. Attention keeps dropping outward toward the ground, the shrubs, the low wet places, the edge between shade and sun, the telltale disturbance of soil, the pattern of leaf shape. Somebody notices that a stand of edible tubers should be ready because the above-ground stems have reached just the right stage. Somebody else spots signs that a fruiting patch was partly raided by birds the previous afternoon, which means the ripest fruit may be gone, but the remainder will still be worth taking. A child asks whether a bright berry is safe. The answer comes with demonstration, warning, memory, maybe a story about the last person who ate too early or failed to cook properly. That is education. There is no classroom, but there is constant teaching. Ethnographic work with recent foragers repeatedly shows that children learn vast amounts of environmental knowledge through proximity, participation, and observation rather than through long formal lectures. That almost certainly extends deep into the prehistoric past. To know 200 or 300 useful species in a region is not an impossible fantasy. It is what life can demand when the landscape itself is pantry, pharmacy, fiber store, and hardware source. And gathering pays off regularly. That matters too. Big game hunting may produce a dramatic feast, but it can also fail completely. Plant gathering, shellfish collection, small animal trapping, egg collecting, and other lower-risk tasks often provide the steadier baseline. This does not mean those tasks were easy. Walking many miles over uneven ground while carrying tools, containers, children, and later food is real labor. Digging roots is real labor. Processing acorns or toxic plants into safe food can be painstaking labor. But it is usually more predictable labor. The old phrase "man the hunter" distorted this by treating gathering as an almost background activity. In reality, it is difficult to imagine sustained human survival without broad-spectrum foraging knowledge. And it was not necessarily exclusive to women. Contemporary and archaeological evidence both point to variability. Many foraging societies do show patterned divisions of labor, often influenced by child care, risk, body burden, skill, and custom. But women have hunted in some contexts, and men have gathered and processed food. The more honest description is that prehistoric labor was flexible within patterns, not locked into a single cartoon formula dot as the gathering group moves. They are doing something else modern people rarely do for long enough to notice. They are building an intimate map of place. Not a map on paper. A map in memory. A bend in a creek where tubers are easier to loosen after rain. A grove that fruits well every other year. A slope where cold settles and delays ripening. A tree whose bark can be used medicinally. A patch best avoided because something toxic grows among the useful plants. A route children can manage. A route better for burdened adults. A place where bees sometimes nest. A place where game often passes at dusk. The landscape is not scenery. It is structured knowledge dot by late morning or midday. Baskets, slings, hides, or netted bags are heavier. Hands are dusty. Feet are tired. Conversation ebbs and returns. There may be pauses in shade, especially in warm climates. There may be small snacks taken on the move, because foragers are not obligated to delay all eating until a ceremonious dinner bell. A tuber here, a berry there, a handful of nuts, maybe an insect-rich find, if culturally acceptable, maybe shellfish eaten at the shore if you are in the right ecology. Human diets were practical before they were neat. Now let us turn, carefully, to hunting. But we should also avoid the opposite exaggeration. Many foraging lifeways seem to have included substantial stretches of unscheduled, lower intensity time when compared with tightly regimented industrial schedules. The work comes in pulses. A demanding hunt. A long gathering trip. Intense food processing. Then slower periods of repair, conversation, watching, grooming, teaching, waiting, recovering, and simply inhabiting the camp. That matters because a human day is not only its tasks. It is also its tempo dot in those quieter stretches. Bodies sprawl in shade. Somebody lies back and watches cloud movement. Somebody grooms another person's hair, scalp, or clothing for dirt and parasites. Somebody turns a bead blank over in the fingers and continues drilling. Somebody absent-mindedly sharpens an edge while listening to other people talk. A child asks the same question 4 times. An elder answers only twice, and the second answer becomes a story. Story matters enormously here. Long before writing, Information had to live somewhere. It lived in memory, ritual, place names, technique, and above all, spoken narrative. Stories are not just entertainment in a foraging world. They are portable archives. A tale about an ancestor getting lost in a sudden flood might encode root knowledge. A humorous story about greed during a meat distribution may reinforce sharing norms. A myth about an animal behaving in a particular season can preserve ecological observation wrapped in the kind of form human minds remember best. Modern research on storytelling in hunter-gatherer societies suggests stories can support cooperation, transmit norms, and increase the prestige of skilled storytellers. That makes intuitive sense. In a small group, the person who can hold attention, encode rules memorably, calm fear, inspire restraint, and make children remember where danger lies is doing social labor of high value. So while some adults work, some teach, and some rest, the camp is also a talking machine. News circulates. Minor conflicts are softened or sharpened. Reputations are built. A joke about someone's laziness may be funny on the surface and corrective underneath. Gossip, which sounds petty in a modern office, becomes one of the oldest tools of social regulation. In a band of 30 people, you cannot easily avoid one another. So you need informal mechanisms to maintain cooperation. Reputation does part of that work. And now let us make the day a little later and turn toward one of the most revealing features of early human life: children. Children are everywhere in the human story. But traditional narratives about prehistory often push them to the edge as if only adult subsistence counted. Yet child care may be one of the central facts shaping the entire day. Human children are unusually dependent for unusually long periods. That means someone is always carrying, feeding, soothing, teaching, guarding, or amusing them. The remarkable part is that in many human societies, that burden is not carried by mothers alone. Anthropology uses the term cooperative breeding or allomaternal care to describe the unusually broad network of helpers involved in raising human children. Grandmothers, older siblings, aunts, uncles, unrelated close allies, and other camp members all contribute. That pattern is visible in many recent foragers and helps explain how human mothers can raise highly dependent offspring while still participating in social and productive life. It is one of the reasons small human communities function at all. So in camp, a toddler may drift among several adults in an hour. A mother gathers nearby while an elder keeps an eye on the child. An older sibling demonstrates how to throw a small stick. A non-parent adult shares a food item. A grandmother tells the child not to touch the sharp flint, then distracts with a shell or carved object. The child is not unattended, but neither are they confined in the modern sense. They are immersed in the life of the group. That has consequences. Children see everything. They see dispute resolution. They see butchery. They see hide work. They see ornament making. They see how food is shared, who jokes with whom, who speaks softly to elders, who can be trusted around fire, who is admired for skill. Culture is not delivered to them in formal lessons after dinner. They absorb it continuously, which brings us naturally to ornament, appearance, and the human refusal to live by utility alone. One of the most touching mistakes people make about early humans is to imagine that beauty came later, once life became easy enough to permit it. The record says otherwise. Personal ornamentation, pigment use, beads, engravings, figurines, and cave art all show that symbolic and aesthetic life ran deep. By 40,000 years ago, in many regions, people were already living in worlds where decoration, identity marking, and symbolic action mattered. That means someone in camp may spend part of the afternoon drilling shell beads, smoothing bone pendants, grinding ochre, or applying pigment to skin, hair, hide, or objects. Ochre is especially striking because it appears again and again in prehistoric contexts over very long spans of time. Sometimes it may have had practical uses, such as hide treatment, or perhaps sunscreen-like functions in some contexts. Sometimes it clearly carried symbolic force. Often the line between practical and symbolic may have been blurry, as it so often is in human life. A bead is not food. A painted body is not extra shelter. And yet, people invested time in both. Why? Because identity matters. Affiliation matters. Courtship matters. Status matters. Ritual matters. Memory matters. A shell from the coast worn far inland says something about movement or exchange. A pendant made from an animal tooth may speak of a hunt, a danger faced, a relation to a species, or simply taste. Body paint can mark participation, grief, maturity, festivity, rank, or beauty. Not every sign system can be reconstructed, but the existence of sign systems is beyond doubt. We should also remember that Upper Paleolithic people were not sealed inside one tiny social bubble forever. Bands likely met seasonally or intermittently in larger aggregations under favorable conditions. Such gatherings would be moments of trade, courtship, alliance formation, information exchange, ritual, and perhaps collective feasting. In those moments, ornament and style become especially meaningful. You are not only alive, you are legible to others. Late afternoon begins to bend the day toward camp concentration again. Gatherers return if they have been out far. Hunters either come back or do not, and their absence itself becomes information. Children range less widely as adults pull them inward. Fuel collection becomes urgent because darkness changes the rules of safety. A camp without enough wood is a vulnerable camp. Fire at night is warmth, light, social center, and deterrent. At this point, something else often happens in our imagined day. Food gathered and food hunted are transformed into dinner. Cooking is not just heat applied to calories. It is one of the great organizers of human time. Fire changes the energy available from starches and proteins, softens tough foods, reduces pathogens in many cases, and concentrates people in one place. A cooked meal is chemistry and social architecture at once. Roots are placed in or near embers. Meat is roasted, smoked, or cut for drying. Fat is prized. Marrow bones may be cracked. Seeds or nuts may be pounded. Bitter or toxic compounds may be leached or neutralized through careful processing known only because somebody learned, remembered, and taught the right method. If there is fish, it may be roasted or smoked. If there are shellfish, they may be heated open. If there are plant foods needing grinding, pounding stones come into use, and the rhythm of labor becomes audible again. Distribution begins when the food is ready. And this is where moral life appears in very practical form. Sharing is not merely kind. It is a strategy in uncertain economies. Large game is too much for one family alone before spoilage. Hunting luck varies. Injury can ruin your next week. Today I share because tomorrow I may fail. That principle, whether consciously stated or not, underlies much forager distribution. It does not eliminate conflict. It structures it. So dinner is a social test. Who receives choice cuts? Do children get soft, rich food? Are elders honored? Does a successful hunter receive prestige rather than monopoly? Does somebody quietly watch to see whether the boastful person gives less than expected? The answers differ by culture and context, but the question itself is ancient. Humans have long turned food into ethics, and once people have eaten enough for their bodies to relax slightly, evening opens into one of the most important parts of the day. This is where the old stereotype of brutal drudgery breaks down completely, because the night fire is not only for cooking, it is for social life. Light shrinks the world into a circle, And within that circle, human beings do many of the things that still define us. They talk, they joke, they replay the day, they soothe hurt feelings, they flirt, they watch children act out little scenes of adult work, they sing, they tell stories, they sit in silence, they think music belongs here too. The discovery of Paleolithic flutes, including famous examples from southwestern Germany, tells us that by more than 35,000 years ago, people were not merely making incidental noise. They were crafting instruments with tonal potential, investing effort in something whose value lies partly in emotion, coordination, and collective experience. A flute beside the fire changes the emotional topography of a night. Rhythm changes it too, whether from clapping, drumming on wood, striking sticks, or vocal patterning that leaves no archaeological trace. Music synchronizes people. It regulates movement, calms children, marks ritual, supports dance, and heightens group feeling. Anybody who has felt a room shift because one voice started singing softly knows this at a scale far smaller than prehistory. In a vulnerable small band, shared rhythm may have been one of the cheapest and strongest forms of social glue ever invented. Story deepens after dark. Firelight and darkness encourage a different mode of attention. Older people, especially, become vital here. In societies without writing, elders are archives with personalities attached. They know where the camp moved in the bad year. They remember who married into which band. They remember where deaths happened, which root failed in drought, which plant cured a stomach sickness, which one killed a careless fool. They remember how to make a thing whose maker is now dead. Old age in physically demanding societies certainly carries pain and limitation, but it can also carry authority, grounded in remembered experience. That does not mean every elder was revered every minute. Human beings have always been human. There were surely difficult old people, cherished old people, funny old people, demanding old people, and wise ones. But broadly speaking, accumulated knowledge had tremendous value. And then, behind story and song, there is the larger symbolic world. By 40,000 years ago, humans in some regions were making deep cave art. Figurines, beads, engraved signs, and burials that indicate ritual attention to the dead. We should be careful not to speak too confidently about belief systems we cannot fully reconstruct. But we can say this much: early humans did not seem to live in a mentally empty world. They lived in one dense with significance. Cave art, especially in places like Chovy, is astonishing not only because it is old and skillful, but because it often appears in deep cave settings far from ordinary domestic life. That suggests deliberate activity beyond casual decoration. Was it ritual, teaching, visionary experience, hunting symbolism, some combination? We do not know for certain. The honest answer remains open. But the paintings themselves are evidence of time set aside for image-making, preparation, lighting, movement into darkness, and the desire to depict animals and signs with extraordinary care. Likewise, the archaeological record of Upper Paleolithic burials in parts of Eurasia, including graves with ochre and grave goods, suggests that some people were treated in death with formality and meaning rather than simple disposal. Again, variation is crucial. Not every body was buried richly. Not every region leaves the same record. But enough exists to show that death could interrupt routine and draw the living into acts of remembrance, respect, or cosmological hope. These things matter to our question because they occupied time. They were part of what humans did, not as extras after real life was finished, but as real life itself. And perhaps this is the deepest correction to the old stereotype. Early humans were not merely surviving. They were world-making. Practical world, social world, symbolic world, all at once. Now the fire burns lower. The air cools further. Outside the illuminated area, the world becomes less readable. Night predators may be moving depending on place and period. Even if large predators are not close, darkness itself changes risk. A twisted ankle in daylight is one thing. In darkness, beyond camp, it is another. So the camp contracts physically and emotionally. People settle. Bedding is adjusted. Additional plant matter may be brought in. Hides are pulled over shoulders. Children are positioned near adults. People with warmer coverings may share. An infant nurses. Someone adds one more piece of wood. Somebody coughs in the smoke and shifts position. A dog, if we are imagining a context late enough and local enough for proto-dog or early dog companionship, may settle near the edge of warmth. Dog domestication is a complicated story, and not all human groups at 40,000 years ago had dogs. But later Upper Paleolithic, evidence shows that human-canine relationships would eventually become another powerful layer in camp life. The stars emerge above open landscapes, and this too is part of the day. We cannot prove exactly what any one Upper Paleolithic group believed about the sky. But people who live outdoors, travel seasonally, and depend on recurring patterns do notice celestial cycles. Moon phases matter. Seasonal star positions matter. Night sky familiarity matters. Whether these observations had already been woven into named constellations, mythic geographies, and calendrical knowledge everywhere is impossible to say. But human beings under dark skies do not remain indifferent to them for long. Some people fall asleep quickly. Others do not. Modern sleep studies among small-scale societies suggest patterns different from the industrial norm, often shaped by temperature, light, activity, and social environment. So our imagined prehistoric night does not have to resemble a neat block of 8 hours of sealed private unconsciousness. Sleep may be lighter, more flexible, interrupted, social, and environmentally responsive. And as people drift off, the final truth of the day becomes visible. Human survival in prehistory was not built out of isolated acts of heroism. It was built out of circles. Circles of firelight. Circles of memory. Circles of food sharing. Circles of teaching. Circles of people sleeping close enough that one cry could wake the others. What did early humans actually do all day? They woke slowly in groups. They assessed weather, tracks, fire, and hunger. They ate what was available and what previous labor had made possible. They gathered plants with astonishing ecological knowledge. They sometimes hunted, not as a non-stop fantasy of action, but as a strategic, risky, cooperative effort built on tracking and timing. They carried, cut, scraped, pounded, roasted, mended, and preserved. They made tools from stone, bone, antler, wood, fiber, resin, and hide. They cared for children collectively. They taught constantly without calling it school. They monitored each other through talk, humor, memory, praise, and blame. They rested when conditions allowed. They decorated bodies and objects, turning matter into meaning. They sang, or at least some did. They told stories by firelight. They buried at least some of their dead with care. They looked at animals and saw not only meat, but significance. Between one root and another. Imagine a hunter kneeling over tracks and reading them as fluently as print. Imagine the patience of scraping hide smooth enough to wear through winter. Imagine laughter after a joke told for the 100th time. Imagine a flute note lifting into cold evening air. Imagine the old woman who remembers where the band should go when the weather changes. Imagine the moment after everyone has eaten, when work loosens and the fire becomes the center of a very small world that still feels, to the people inside it, complete. That is what early humans did all day. They lived, not perfectly, not peacefully all the time, not easily, but fully. And if you have enjoyed this slow walk back into the deep human past, you know the gentle routine by now. Leave a like for the algorithm if you feel like helping the channel. Subscribe if you want more long, calm journeys into history. And if you want, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. For now, let the fire burn low, let the stars keep their watch, and let the hunt wait until morning got before we let the embers die completely. There is more worth noticing. Because one ordinary day also contains thousands of invisible calculations that never announce themselves as calculations. Take walking, for example. Walking is so basic to prehistoric life that it almost disappears from description, yet it shapes nearly everything. Early humans walked to gather, walked to hunt, walked to find water, walked to visit hull eyes, walked to scout, walked to collect fuel, walked to move camp, walked to bury the dead, walked because the world was not built around wheels, engines, or roads. A day might include several miles without anyone considering it exceptional. This does not mean all walking was grim or punishing. It means mobility was built into the body and the social mind. A person knew the feel of trails under different weather, the drag of wet ground, the ease of a ridge route, the danger of an exposed crossing, the places where children tired first, and the places where an elder needed help. Even distance was felt differently when your day had not been chopped into appointments. A long walk could be work, but it could also be conversation, observation, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. Think too about hands. We speak about early humans as though their main feature were brain size, but their days were carried by hands. Hands digging into earth for tubers. Hands testing the edge of flint. Hands twisting fibers. Hands lifting a child onto the hip. Hands rubbing hide with fat. Hands pressing pigment into cracks on a shell bead. Hands checking whether cooked roots have softened enough. Hands touching another person's forehead to gauge fever. Hands feeding embers. Hands making the same repair for the third time in a month, because useful things wear out when they are used hard every day. It is hard to overstate how much skilled hand labor filled human history before industrial production, pushed so much of making away from ordinary households and camps. Then there is smell, a sense modern indoor life often muffles. A prehistoric day is a scented day. Smoke in hair and hide. Wet earth after rain. Resin warming near a fire. Animal blood at a butchery place. Crushed leaves on hands. Sea salt on a coastal wind. Rot in a carcass left too long. The sweetness of ripe fruit. The warning scent of something cat-like nearby. The rank smell of damp hide before proper treatment. Smell informs mood, memory, and decision. The human nose is not a dog's, but it is not useless either. In a life close to fuel, food, weather, and animals, smell is part of thinking. And because the world is so physical, injuries become part of the ordinary day as well. Not always dramatic injuries. Often small ones. A split fingernail while working fiber. A cut from stone. A thorn in the foot. A bruise from carrying load over rough ground. Smoke in the eyes. Back strain from hauling wood or meat. We know from skeletons and wear patterns that prehistoric people lived with accumulated strain and healed trauma. That means some part of the camp's daily labor must always have gone toward coping, adjusting, compensating, and caring. A person with a damaged leg may still process hide or watch children or maintain fire. A person with pain in the hands may teach more than they make. In that sense, adaptation happens within the camp as much as between camp and landscape. This reminds us that prehistoric life is not best understood by picturing the strongest adults only. It includes infants, old people, the injured, the chronically limited, and those whose greatest value lies in what they remember or notice rather than what they can carry. There is archaeological evidence in different periods of people surviving for long stretches with serious impairments, which strongly suggests care from others. That fact alone tells us something profound about what humans were doing all day. They were not merely maximizing immediate efficiency. They were maintaining relationships strong enough to keep vulnerable people alive. Ordinary weather deserves its own quiet chapter too. We tend to narrate the deep past through extremes, the blizzard, the drought, the predator attack, the flood, but most days were made of ordinary weather, and ordinary weather is what shapes routine. A cool, clear morning invites one kind of movement. A hot afternoon forces another. Wind changes how smoke behaves and where you sit. Dampness changes which fuel burns well. Rain changes track visibility, plant digging, travel plans, and the mood of the whole camp. A few hours of warmth may be enough to dry a hide, or not enough at all. A cloudy night changes the fire's importance and what can be seen beyond it. To live closely with weather is to have fewer illusions of control and greater sensitivity to timing got in a colder region. You rise thinking immediately about warmth retention, coverings, and the quality of fuel. In a warmer one, shade, water, and the best time to travel loom larger. Seasonal transitions matter even more. The same valley can be generous in one month and nearly useless in another. So a day in prehistory always contains at least a little long-term planning. If berries are nearly finished, what replaces them? If migratory herds are moving, when do we follow? If the river is dropping, when do fish become easier to trap, and when do drinking sources become less reliable? If the cold is coming, which hides still need finishing? These questions do not belong only to chiefs or planners, because most foraging societies had no bureaucracy to hide planning inside. They belong to everyone old enough to contribute to the group's memory of what comes next. That future-mindedness is one reason. Prehistoric life should never be mistaken for mindless immediacy. People were constantly dealing with the present, yes, but often through a thick lens of remembered seasons. A child hears not only do this now, but do this now because when the moon looked like this 2 years ago, the storms began early. Or because those birds arrive just before the fish run. Or because roots become stringy if you wait until the cold bites harder. Memory is ecological. You do not store it in a notebook. You store it in stories, habits, route choices, and the ability to notice one meaningful sign in 100 irrelevant ones. Even the camp's spatial arrangement may reflect this weather knowledge. Hearth placement is not random if smoke needs to vent well, or if certain sleeping spots are colder than others. Archaeological work on cave occupation and hearth location suggests people were balancing heat, smoke, light, air movement, and space use in more sophisticated ways than a casual observer might expect. In other words, when a prehistoric person shifted their bedding a little farther back from the entrance, or moved a task slightly away from the main fire, that small choice could express generations of practical learning. Let us stay with evening a little longer, because the hour after food and before full sleep may be the most revealing part of the human day. By then, the body is no longer rushing toward necessity. That is when people become most obviously themselves. One person grows talkative only after dark. Another falls into thoughtful silence. Children, exhausted from movement, become soft and slow, and suddenly more willing to listen than they were at noon. An elder may begin a story nobody requested because the right pause opened and everyone knew enough to be quiet. Someone starts mending a thing that could have waited until tomorrow, not because it must be finished now, but because hands often like a task while ears follow a story. Night compresses attention. In daylight, perception is scattered across horizon and pathway, in work area, and all the tiny checks of practical life. At night, beyond the fire, there is darkness. So sound grows larger. The crackle of resinous wood. A laugh. A child's sleepy complaint. The scrape of bone on stone. A dog's sudden alertness if dogs are present. The far cry of an animal that remains invisible. Perhaps this is one reason oral culture can become so powerful in firelit settings. Voice takes up more space when the eye has less to do. And it is in that condition that myths, cautionary tales, remembered genealogies, flirtations, jokes, and instructions can all braid together. A hunting story becomes a lesson in patience. A funny story about a greedy relative becomes a lesson in sharing. A tale about an animal spirit may preserve close observation of that animal's behavior and warning signs. Not every story needs a moral, of course. Sometimes people just enjoy a good tale. But even pleasure has social function. People who laugh together find it easier to live together. This is especially important in communities where there is no formal institution standing above the group to settle every dispute. Social cohesion has to be maintained from within. If someone is chronically selfish, reckless, cruel, or lazy, the problem cannot simply be outsourced. It must be absorbed, corrected, mocked, negotiated, or in some cases, split away from. So everyday speech matters immensely. Tone matters. Timing matters. Humor matters. A teasing remark can accomplish what a blunt accusation would inflame. A well-timed story can remind the whole camp how one ought to behave without forcing anyone into direct public defeat. Modern life often treats conversation as secondary to action. In a small foraging band, conversation is action. It allocates reputation, circulates warnings, teaches children, manages tension, recalls debt, and renews bonds. That means a long evening of talk by the fire is not the absence of work. It is some of the most necessary work human beings ever evolved to do. There is another misconception worth easing apart. Before sleep fully takes us, the idea that early humans lived without planning because they lived without writing. Writing stores information outside the body, yes, but the absence of writing does not imply the absence of planning. Quite the opposite. In many ways, a foraging life demands planning at several scales at once. Daily planning asks who goes where tomorrow, what needs repair, whether enough fuel remains, whether the hide must be finished before rain, whether a child is well enough to travel, whether a nearby patch is worth revisiting. Seasonal planning asks where the group should move, what foods are appearing or fading, what alliances should be renewed at aggregation sites, what equipment needs replacement before harsher weather. Life history planning, though surely not formalized as such, includes courtship, marriage ties, exchange relationships, teaching apprentices, and the gradual handover of knowledge from old to young. Objects themselves can carry part of that planning. A partly finished spear point, lying beside a napper's place, says tomorrow's labor has already begun. Meat set to dry says future hunger is being answered tonight. A basket repaired before it fails says somebody is thinking ahead. A hide being cut for a child's winter clothing says the cold exists in imagination before it arrives in flesh. These are all forecasts expressed materially. Trade and long-distance raw materials make the point even more strongly. When archaeology finds obsidian or shell, or other materials transported impressive distances, it tells us people were linked by networks of exchange or movement larger than a single camp. Such networks do not run on pure spontaneity. They depend on remembered routes, repeated meetings, trust, obligation, and expectations about future reciprocity. A band may only meet another band occasionally, but the possibility of that meeting can influence decisions for months, and because kinship ties likely stretched across bands, the social horizon of any one individual could be larger than the campfire circle immediately around him. A young woman might have relatives in another group she sees seasonally. A child may know that a certain old man from far away once brought shell beads or a different hafting trick. Marriage partners may come from outside the immediate band, helping avoid inbreeding and strengthening alliances. This, too, is part of what early humans did all day, though much of it appears not in any one dramatic moment, but in the background structure of expectation. It is also worth dwelling gently on the dead, not because every day contained a burial, but because awareness of death likely shaped many ordinary days. In a world where serious illness and injury were close companions, the possibility of loss was never theoretical. A cough could worsen. A wound could redden. A child could fail to thrive. A hunt could go wrong. People lived with more acute reminders of mortality than many modern communities do. Yet that does not mean they walked around in permanent despair. Human beings adapt psychologically to the conditions they know. What it does mean is that memory of the dead may have been woven into daily routines. A route might pass near a burial place. A tool might have belonged to someone now gone. A story about a successful hunt could include the name of a relative who once taught the method. An elder's warning about floodwater might carry extra weight because they had seen death there before. So even on an ordinary day, the living share camp not only with one another, but with remembered absences. Where burials are archaeologically visible with ochre, ornaments, or grave goods, we glimpse one end of that process. But much grief leaves no neat trace. It lives in changed sleeping arrangements, in a child being comforted by someone new, in a joke no longer told by the person who used to tell it best, in a name repeated at the fire. We should not imagine prehistoric people as emotionally simpler than ourselves. The forms of expression may differ, but attachment and loss are ancient. This matters because grief reshapes labor. A bereaved camp may delay a move, redistribute tasks, feed someone who is not hungry, keep children closer than usual, or spend an evening telling memory-heavy stories rather than practical plans. Social life is never suspended cleanly apart from subsistence. The same people who must still fetch water and tend fire are also the ones mourning. So the emotional and the practical move together, as they still do. One more quiet correction before the night ends. Early human intelligence did not show itself only in moments of invention. It showed itself in routine competence. Modern people often reserve the word intelligent for abstraction, novelty, or formal education. But there is another kind of intelligence so embedded in action that it becomes almost invisible, knowing how to exist well in a place, knowing the useful stone source over the next ridge, knowing how to tell when smoke will settle badly in a shelter, knowing which child is old enough for a longer walk and which still needs carrying before they admit it, knowing how to split labor after a hunt so no valuable part is wasted, knowing how to keep peace between two irritated adults because tomorrow they must cooperate, knowing that a silence from the usually talkative elder means pain, not anger, knowing the right amount of heat to soften resin without ruining it, knowing when a story will teach better than an instruction. That is intelligence distributed across the whole day. It does not announce itself with monuments. It leaves traces in survival, in learned technique, in social continuity, in children who grow into competent adults because somebody was paying attention to the thousand small things that formal histories often skip. If we miss that, it is partly because routine work is always easier to ignore than spectacular events. But routine is where civilizations, however small, are actually sustained. So perhaps the deepest answer to our question is that early humans were doing what humans have always done when conditions allow them to keep going. They were knitting life together from many threads at once. Food, care, memory, skill, caution, risk, pleasure, beauty, and rest. Remove any one of those, and the day becomes thinner. Keep them together, and even a life without writing. Electricity or cities can be recognizably, richly human. And if we sit beside that fire a little longer still, long enough to let the modern world loosen its grip, another contrast begins to emerge. Early humans spent much of the day in feedback-rich environments. When they paid attention, the world answered. Read the tracks correctly, and you found game. Miss the weather sign, and you got soaked or trapped. Harvest too much from one patch, and next time it was poorer. Share generously, and you deepened the social safety net that might save you later. Neglect a tool, and it failed under stress. In many modern lives, consequences can feel abstract, delayed, or hidden in systems too large to grasp. In prehistory, many consequences were close enough to feel in the hand. That closeness may be part of why their days, though difficult, often had a clarity ours sometimes lack. The purpose of a task was rarely mysterious. You repaired a spear because you needed a working spear. You collected fuel because cold and darkness were coming. You taught a child to plant because one day they would need that plant. You watched the sky because tomorrow depended on it. The work could be tiring. The risk could be real. But the why was seldom buried under layers of paperwork, abstraction, or bureaucracy. None of this means we should romanticize the Paleolithic or pretend we ought to abandon medicine, sanitation, writing, agriculture, or modern safety. The hardships were real, often brutal, but neither should we flatten those lives into misery and miss what they reveal about the durable shape of human needs. People need competence. They need belonging. They need purpose visible at human scale. They need beauty that is made, not merely consumed. They need stories. They need moments when no machine is demanding more from them. They need evenings where the day can settle gradually instead of snapping shut. And that is why the question of what early humans did all day never stays politely in the past. It keeps reaching forward. It asks what kind of day a human nervous system was built to expect. Not a perfect day, not an easy one, but a day with movement, company, observation, practical effort, shared food, unscheduled time, and darkness that really becomes darkness. A day ending in warmth beside known people. A day in which the world is not always comfortable, but usually intelligible. By now, in our imagined camp, most people are asleep. The last glow of the fire has collapsed inward. Wood becomes coals, and coals become that low red light that seems almost alive. Breathing settles into rhythm. Somewhere, beyond the camp, there are still animals moving through the dark, each on its own business. Above, the sky is full of stars. No electric haze is dimmed. The people asleep here do not know about empires or engines or satellites or markets or streaming video or office towers. But they know enough to be human, which turns out to be a very great deal. They know how to wake together. They know how to keep children alive. They know how to turn stone, bone, wood, fiber, hide, and fire into a livable world. They know that food tastes better shared. They know that stories can carry truth farther than commands. They know that beauty deserves time, even when life is not easy. They know that memory is a resource. They know that a camp is strongest when no one is allowed to vanish unnoticed. They know that tomorrow depends on what is done today, and that tomorrow is never guaranteed anyway. So when dawn returns to them, pale and cold at first, another ordinary day will begin. Someone will stir the ash. Someone will rise before fully wanting to. Someone will check the sky. Someone will stretch sore shoulders. A child will wake too early. Someone will laugh. Someone will worry quietly. Someone will remember where the roots are good. Someone will test the edge of a point. Someone will carry a baby. Someone will sing under their breath. Someone will walk out into the morning with a basket, or a spear, or both. And once again, what early humans actually do all day will be both simpler and larger than any myth about cavemen ever made it sound. They will work, rest, make, teach, watch, share, plan, argue, care, remember, decorate, imagine, and return at last to the fire. The world can wait until morning. For them, and for you, it always could. There is still another layer to the day that rarely appears in simple summaries, and that is maintenance of knowledge through repetition. In literate societies, memory can be externalized. You can write a list, draw a map, label a container, record a date, archive an argument, and trust paper or a screen to hold what your mind does not. In early human worlds, the body and the group had to do most of that storage. So repetition was not mindless. It was the infrastructure of continuity. The same route was walked often enough that children learned it before they could explain it. The same warning about a dangerous plant returned in slightly different stories until it became unforgettable. The same tool-making gestures were performed in sight of the young until the wrist understood before language did. The same songs may have marked the same parts of the night, the same seasons, the same rituals, until memory and feeling fused. That changes how we should imagine boredom. A modern person might think, would it not become dull to hear the same story, walk the same path, scrape the same hide, feed the same fire? Perhaps sometimes it did. Human impatience is not new, but repetition in a world of low redundancy is reassuring as well as tedious. If the same path still leads to water, that is good news. If the same elder still remembers the sequence for processing a difficult food safely, that is good news. If the same song still quiets children and marks belonging, that is good news. Familiarity in uncertain environments can be its own form of wealth. We should think too about humor, which archaeology almost never preserves directly, and yet must have been everywhere. It is hard to imagine human beings with language, close daily contact, and generations of shared memory somehow failing to joke. A child slips while pretending to stalk a bird. Someone exaggerates the size of the fish that got away. A chronic braggart is teased after returning empty-handed. Someone mimics the gait of a grumpy elder with affectionate irreverence. Humor lowers tension, mocks selfishness, cushions correction, and keeps hard life from becoming emotionally unlivable. A camp that can laugh together is often a camp that can survive friction. This matters because prehistoric life was not a morality play full of noble cooperation alone. Small groups can be tender, but they can also be suffocating. Everyone knows everyone's business. Jealousies have little room to evaporate. Romantic tension, resentment over food, irritation at uneven labor, conflict over risk, annoyance at children, disputes over skill or credit, all of this must have existed. The point is not that early human life was harmonious. The point is that people had to develop ways of continuing despite conflict. Sometimes that meant mediation. Sometimes it meant avoidance. Sometimes it meant gossip, teasing, ritualized complaint, or temporary fission of a group. Daily life includes all those social adjustments. Even when they leave no obvious archaeological footprint. Imagine a late afternoon disagreement after a poor day of hunting. One person wants to move camp sooner. Another insists the nearby valley still has promise. A third thinks the argument itself is foolish because the children are tired and a move tomorrow would be miserable. No one opens a meeting agenda. No one drafts minutes. Yet a decision emerges through tone, seniority, persuasion, memory of past conditions, and the emotional temperature of the group. These micropolitics are ancient. Human politics did not begin with kings. It began when more than two adults had to agree on what to do next. And in a society without prisons or strong centralized force, consensus, reputation, and social pressure become all the more important. A selfish individual can damage everyone's odds. But the group cannot always compel change through violence without risking fracture. So many ordinary evenings likely involved the soft work of social calibration, not grand law, but the constant adjustment of cooperation. Another almost invisible feature of the day is apprenticeship. We have already spoken about children learning by watching, but older adolescents and young adults deserve their own attention. This is the stage where play becomes competence and competence becomes identity. A teenager may no longer merely imitate a napper, but begin to be trusted with useful pieces. A young person may go on longer gathering trips and be expected to recognize more species independently. A novice hunter may not lead, but may begin to track, carry, throw, or help process kills in increasingly central ways. A young leather worker may shift from simple repairs to shaping clothing that actually matters. This transition is socially charged. Praise matters. Mockery matters. Failure stings because the group notices. Success matters because the group notices that too. In modern life, adolescence is often buffered by institutions. In prehistoric life, competence could be visible in much plainer form. Can you keep up? Can you observe? Can you avoid needless danger? Can you hold your temper? Can you share? Can you remember? Can you make something reliable? These questions are asked by daily life itself. Courtship, too, would weave into ordinary routines rather than existing only as a separate traumatic subplot. Shared work creates opportunities for attention. So does ornament. So do gatherings between bands, song, dance, humor, and reputation. An especially skilled toolmaker, generous hunter, gifted storyteller, patient caregiver, or elegant maker of ornaments could all become attractive for reasons that far exceed raw physical strength. Human mate choice has always involved social intelligence and visible competence. Not only muscles and spectacle. This helps explain why apparently non-essential crafts, such as bead making and body decoration, should not be dismissed as luxury. They belong to communication. They can signal affiliation, attractiveness, maturity, grief, triumph, or ritual role. A small carved pendant may mean little nutritionally and everything socially. The same is true now of countless objects modern people wear or carry, though we often flatter ourselves that our symbolic lives are more sophisticated than those of people with ochre and bone beads. They are not necessarily more sophisticated. They are simply different. Let us return for a moment to cave art and the making of images, because even if not every day included image making, the capacity behind it changes how we understand all ordinary days. A person who can render an animal convincingly on stone has spent a long time looking at animals. The curve of a back, the angle of a horn, the compression of legs in motion, the line of the neck, the mass of the shoulder, these are learned through repeated attention. Art, then, is not separate from subsistence knowledge. It may grow out of it. The same mind that notices a herd's movement for hunting can notice its beauty for depiction. The same respect, fear, or fascination that helps a hunter survive might also help an artist remember. And if some cave spaces were entered for ritual or visionary purposes, as many scholars have proposed in various forms, then ordinary days were connected to extraordinary nights by a continuum rather than a sharp divide. The person who paints in the cave is also the person who ate by the fire, walked the valley, worried about weather, and perhaps cared for a child that morning. Symbolic life does not float above subsistence. It grows inside it. The same is true of music. A bone flute is not evidence that everyone spent every night in concert, but it is evidence that at least some humans invested labor in tonal sound for reasons beyond immediate survival. Once that possibility exists, evenings change forever. Music can coordinate dance, and dance can bind groups, attract partners, enact myths, and deepen collective emotion. Repetition of rhythm can alter mood and perception. No wonder music has never left us. It solved ancient social problems elegantly and pleasurably. One should also say something about silence, because silence in prehistoric settings was not empty in the modern sense. It was full of environmental information. You sit after the meal and stop speaking for a while. The crackle of the fire becomes clearer. The breathing of the group becomes audible. Insects or frogs or nightbirds declare the season and habitat more faithfully than a caption ever could. A shift in the usual sound pattern might indicate wind change or animal movement. Quiet listening is not inactivity. It is another way the world talks back. And then there are dreams. We cannot excavate a dream, but any people with language and story almost certainly had ways of talking about dreaming. A striking dream might be dismissed, laughed at, worried over, or folded into a larger symbolic system depending on culture. In many traditional societies, dreams carry social or spiritual meaning. It would be surprising if Paleolithic peoples were uniquely uninterested in them. That means even sleep bleeds into daytime interpretation. A person wakes and reports what they saw in the night. Someone older says it is a warning. Someone else jokes that it only means they ate too much marrow. Already, the day is shaped a little by events that happened nowhere visible. Mobility between camps introduces still more texture. Not every day ends where it began. Some days are days of movement, and a moving day changes everything. Bedding is rolled or abandoned depending on materials. Fire may need carrying as embers or remaking later. Children become loads as much as companions. The order of walking matters. Scouts may move ahead. Everyone becomes more attentive to where camp will be made before night. Moving days compress labor, decision-making, and mood differently from stay-put days. Fatigue may be sharper. Tempers may be shorter. But new camp means new resources, fresh tracks, different views. Perhaps reunion with another group, a temporary camp, a rock shelter, an open-air stop by a river, a cave mouth used for some nights, but not all. These are not random sleeping spots. Each has trade-offs. Shelter from wind may mean worse, smoke buildup. A cave offers protection, but perhaps dampness or darkness. An open camp near water offers convenience, but greater exposure. Thorn brush may be gathered to shape approaches. Hearth position may be chosen with care. Where children sleep may differ from where tools are laid out. Where refuse goes matters if scavengers are a concern. So camp making itself is a daily or repeated craft. Another layer of human design, too, ordinary to earn much glory and too important to neglect. If we widen our view from one day to many, another pattern becomes visible. The day teaches the body. Muscles, endurance, balance, dexterity, attention span, thermal tolerance, and pain tolerance all take shape in these routines. A child raised in a foraging society learns not only facts, but postures, pacing, and bodily confidence. How to squat for long periods. How to carry asymmetrical weight. How to step on loose ground. How to sit near a fire without drifting too close. How to use a sharp edge without panic. How to sleep in communal settings. How to wake alert to subtle sound. A modern gym trains fragments of these capacities artificially. Prehistoric life trained them by being life. This bodily education also helps explain why the ordinary day can look less frantic than outsiders imagine. People adapted to it from infancy. Tasks that would exhaust a modern novice may have felt normal to those who had done related movements for years. Familiar labor is still labor, but it occupies the body differently than unfamiliar strain. We can even think about time itself here. In our world, time is often external, measured by devices, standardized across distance, cut into exact units. In early human worlds, time was more often relational. Dawn, midday heat, moon phase, season, the return of a species, the ripening of a plant, the length of a shadow, the progress of a task, the readiness of a child, the fading of embers. That does not mean people lacked temporal awareness. It means their awareness was tied more closely to events and cycles than to numbered minutes. Such a day can feel slower without containing fewer events. It simply carries them differently, and perhaps that is why imagining prehistoric life can feel oddly soothing even when the hardships are acknowledged. A day governed by light, weather, hunger, children, fire, and company is often severe, yet it is not fragmented in the same way modern life is. Tasks belong to one another. Eating flows into talk. Talk flows into repair. Repair flows into teaching. Teaching flows into play. Play flows into evening song or story. There are interruptions, dangers, frustrations, but fewer absolute boundaries between kinds of time. The same people who work together also rest together. The same place where food is prepared is where memory is exchanged. The same fire warms bodies, cooks roots, hardens wood, dries hide, lights a story, and protects sleep. This integrated quality may be one of the deepest differences between their day and ours. We separate work from family, learning from production, play from skill acquisition, ritual from ordinary life, care from economics, art from subsistence, and rest from sociality. Early human days often braided these together. A child learns while pretending to help. An ornament is made while listening to a story. A root is taught while gathering. A social dispute is eased while eating. A song both entertains and minds. The categories modern life isolates were not always so sharply divided, so when we ask what early humans actually did all day, we should resist answering with a list alone, though lists are useful. The truer answer is that they moved through a rhythm of waking, assessing, feeding, ranging outward, making, carrying, teaching, talking, processing, sharing, marking meaning, and closing the circle again around the fire. Some days broke the rhythm with crisis, celebration, death, encounter, weather shock, or hunting success. But most lives, ancient as now, were built from repeated ordinary days, and the ordinary day is where humanity reveals itself best. Not just in masterpieces and graves, not just in migrations and extinctions, not just in the grand evolutionary narrative, but in the small decisions repeated thousands of times. Give the child another piece. Repair the binding now. Remember this place. Listen to that elder. Joke instead of accuse. Save some fuel. Move before the weather turns. Paint the body anyway. Tell the story one more time. Sit a little longer by the warmth before sleep. Those decisions are history too. They are, in fact, most of history by the final hour of night, when the last talk is stopped, and even the habitual warriors have drifted off. The camp is held together by arrangements so ordinary they can look invisible. The ash that will help restart the morning fire. The pile of gathered roots waiting for processing tomorrow. The point drying in its haft. The hide stretched out where dogs or scavengers cannot easily ruin it. The children folded into the safest sleeping places. The elder positioned where help is nearest. The tools set just close enough to reach if something goes wrong in the dark. The memory in each mind of what tomorrow might require. Morning will come again, and with it, all the practicalities. But for now, in that low red half-light, the answer to our question can finally rest. What did early humans actually do all day? They practiced being human. They practiced it in hunger and in satiety, in work, and in waiting, in pain, and in comfort, in technique, and in affection, in caution, and in curiosity, in speech. Song, gesture, and silence. They practiced it so thoroughly, so successfully, that their habits still live in us. Even when our tools, buildings, and schedules try to persuade us otherwise, and if this walk through one ancient day has eased your mind a little, then gently like the video, Subscribe to Sleepy Time History for more long, immersive journeys into the past, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. Until next time, let the fire burn low, let the sky keep turning, and let the world wait until morning. Because we have stayed so long with one day, we can also notice something easy to miss from a distance. The day is full of thresholds. Dawn is a threshold between vulnerability in darkness and mobility in light. The first successful fire-up of the morning is a threshold between cold and workable warmth. The moment when a child is trusted with a sharper tool is a threshold. The moment when gathered food comes back into camp is a threshold from uncertainty to sufficiency, however temporary. The evening meal is a threshold between labor and storytelling. Sleep is a threshold between watchfulness and surrender. Human cultures everywhere build meaning around thresholds, and prehistory was surely no exception. The practical and the symbolic often meet exactly where one state becomes another. Take adolescence again. At some point, a child goes from being watched constantly to being counted on. At some point, their mistakes begin to matter more because their labor now matters more. Many societies mark such changes with ritual. Even where direct evidence is scarce, it would be surprising if no rites, tests, or recognized moments attended the transition to adult responsibilities. You could almost feel such a transition inside ordinary labor. A young person returns from a long gathering trip, not merely as a helper, but as someone who independently found and identified useful foods. A young hunter is trusted not merely to carry, but to throw. A young maker produces a point or garment another person depends on. Skill becomes socially visible, and visibility changes identity. Thresholds also appear in relationships between bands. An arrival from outside camp turns a normal evening into an event. Strangers, cousins, in-laws, allies, potential mates, old friends, rivals, and trading partners do not simply appear. They cross from unknown or absent to present. Their arrival brings news from elsewhere, which in a world without writing is like weather entering camp. Suddenly there are stories of another valley, another herd movement, another death, another innovation in making or hunting. Material things may change hands, but so do techniques and narratives. A better way to bind a point, a warning about a dangerous route, a story from another group's ancestors, a song learned elsewhere, all can travel with the visitor. This is one way human life grew larger than the individual camp, without needing cities dot, and because knowledge traveled. Ordinary days in one camp were linked to discoveries made far away. The shell bead on one person's chest may carry a coastline they have never seen. The stone in a point may have originated from a distant source exchanged through several groups. The song sung at night may have cousins in another valley. Human cultural life was already networked, just at the speed of feet and memory. The day also contains experimentation. We should not imagine that every technique was always perfectly inherited and never altered. Someone tries a slightly different way of heating resin. Someone discovers a better striking angle on a core. Someone notices a plant that can be mixed into bedding or hide treatment. Someone experiments with a new ornament shape. Someone copies a visiting group's knot or spear design. Most experiments fail or fade. A few work well enough to be copied. Over generations, these tiny adjustments become technological change. Innovation does not arrive only as a genius moment. Often it arrives as a small practical deviation that proves useful, that makes ordinary attention one of the great engines of prehistory. To change a method intelligently, you must first know the old method well. To notice improvement, you must care about outcomes. To teach improvement, you must persuade others it is worth adopting. All of that happens inside daily life. The camp is a workshop, laboratory, school, nursery, dining hall, and theater at once, that we can even imagine how boredom itself may sometimes have encouraged invention. A person repeating a familiar task may vary it slightly out of curiosity, impatience, or play. A child messing around with a bit of bone may discover a new sound. A maker looking for a cleaner hole through a bead may alter a tool tip. Leisure and tinkering belong to the same family. When not every waking minute is swallowed by emergency, minds begin to wander. And wandering minds are often where novelty starts. There is one final piece of the ordinary day that deserves a place before we sleep, and that is gratitude, though not in the modern self-help sense. Simply the relief that comes when enough has gone right for one more day to close. Enough fuel, enough food, no serious injury, children accounted for, fire alive, tools still serviceable, the weather not yet turned, the group still intact. In a life where certainty was limited, small sufficiencies must have mattered deeply. Perhaps that is one reason evening could feel so full. Every ordinary safe night was, in some sense, an achievement shared by all. So if we step back now, not from archaeology, but from arrogance, the picture becomes clearer. Early humans were not perpetual victims of nature, nor pure masters of it. They were participants in it, sometimes vulnerable, sometimes skilled, often both at once. Their days were made from the same ingredients that still make a life feel real: effort, uncertainty, companionship, memory, usefulness, wonder, and the chance, if the day went well enough, to rest among others under a darkening sky. And now, truly, the camp is quiet. The embers have done their work. The stories are stored again in sleeping minds. Tomorrow's labor is waiting in roots, tracks, hides, weather, and children who will wake before anyone wants them to. But for tonight, that is enough. More than enough. If you listen closely enough, even the objects around the sleeping camp begin to tell the story of the day that just ended. The broken flakes near the napper's place say somebody prepared for tomorrow. The scraped hide says cold was answered in advance. The empty berry container says a patch was found at the right moment. The ash beneath the bedding says insects were kept at bay by knowledge learned long ago. The pendant near someone's shoulder says beauty was not postponed until life became easier. The child asleep with dirty feet says learning happened in movement, not in theory. The elder turning over in the dark says memory still has work to do tomorrow. In that way, a prehistoric camp after nightfall is like a quiet ledger, every object recording effort, choice, and value. And perhaps this is the gentlest surprise in all of it. When we ask what early humans did all day, the answer does not strip them of humanity and reduce them to function. It restores them to humanity by showing how much function and feeling belong together. Food was never only nutrition. It was sharing, risk management, preference, memory, and pleasure. Fire was never only heat. It was technology, safety, conversation, and the center of evening. Tools were never only implements. They were skill made visible, sometimes beauty made durable, sometimes reputation held in the hand. Child care was never only biological necessity. It was teaching, affection, patience, frustration, continuity, and the reason knowledge survived. Stories were never only entertainment. They were maps, laws, jokes, warnings, history, and imagination, all braided into one scene that way. An ordinary day 40,000 years ago becomes less alien than many people expect. The materials are different. The dangers are sharper. The comforts are fewer. But the shape of concern is recognizable. How do we keep everyone fed? How do we protect the vulnerable? How do we remember what matters? How do we pass on skill? How do we live with one another without breaking the group apart? How do we mark joy, grief, attraction, gratitude, and fear? How do we make room for beauty in a world that can be harsh? Those are not ancient questions. They are human questions, Our ancestors asked them with stone tools and hearth smoke and dark skies overhead. We ask them with phones glowing in our hands. The language changes. The nervous system beneath it, at least in broad outline, does not dot so if you ever find yourself imagining the deep past as only brutal. Pause and picture one more ordinary evening. A circle of light. A smell of smoke. Tired legs. Full or half-full stomachs. Somebody mending. Somebody listening. Somebody already asleep. Somebody beginning a story everybody knows and still wants to hear. Outside, the dark. Inside, for a few hours, enough warmth, enough food, enough company, enough memory. Not paradise. Not ease. But enough dot, and that may be the oldest human luxury of all dot. And because the question was what they did all day, not what they did on the rarest and most dramatic days, it is fitting to end with the ordinary once more. Morning fire. Shared food. A walk outward. Work with the hands. Children underfoot. Constant teaching. Constant noticing. Rest when possible. Repair before failure. A return at dusk. A meal. Talk. Story. Sleep. Then dawn again. That rhythm carried our species across continents. Not only genius, not only courage, not only luck, but rhythm. A workable day repeated often enough, adapted carefully enough, shared widely enough that generation after generation could endure, learn, and move on. Ordinary days built the human world. They still do.